Welcome to the Divorce Doctor podcast. I am so excited to have my friend Regina DeMeo here today. Regina has been helping families in the DC area with family law issues for over 20 years. Since 2007, she has also practiced mediation and collaborative divorce, which she promotes extensively through the media. For 2 years, she hosted a TV show on MMCTV to help families tackle major issues. In 2012, she became a legal commentator for Sirius XM, and in 2013, she appeared on Good Morning America. The past 10 years, she has been a frequent guest lecturer at law schools, and in 2019 was an adjunct professor at the GW University Family Law Clinic. She was recently recognized in the Super Lawyers of Maryland and DC, as well as Washingtonian Magazine's top lawyer in the December 2020 issue. She's been featured in the Washington Post, as well as Bethesda Magazine. She's frequently quoted in the media as an expert in family law who candidly shares her own experience going through the divorce process and the challenges of being a single mom. Regina, thank you so much for being here. I am so happy to have you. And as I just read, you really do a beautiful job of sharing your incredible wisdom and intelligence about the law and your own personal experience. And I think it's so important for people when they hear collaborative lawyers and mediators speak their truth. And so I'm so excited to hear about you today.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited.
Yeah, me too. So let's jump in. The first question I always ask people on this podcast is, what is the one word you would use to describe your divorce?
I mean, for me, it was heartbreaking.
Yeah.
I mean, I lost my best friend.
Yeah. And even thinking about that now, right? It's really emotional to think about losing a best friend.
Yeah. And I mean, for me, it was extra, important to learn that lesson because I was already a divorce lawyer. And as a divorce lawyer, I was focused on the law and separating assets, right? But I didn't really understand the emotional loss that my clients were going through. And it was like a real swift kick in the butt.
Yeah. Yeah. And do you think that made you a more compassionate lawyer when you were able to really feel and experience that deep heartbreak?
Absolutely. Because, it is not just a legal process that people are going through. They're also going through an incredible emotional grief process, and their finances are in total flux, right? It's like you're hit with the perfect storm. 3 different areas of your life are all, up in the air.
Yeah. And, I'm just, as you're talking, I also just occurred to me that suddenly you're supposed to trust a lawyer, a financial planner, maybe a therapist, a coach, a co-parent, when your trust might have just been deeply broken in your relationship, right?
Yeah, it is ironic.
Yeah. And I love, I've had people suggest to me that clients should ask lawyers, have you been through a divorce yourself? Like they think that's an important question for people to ask.
It's funny. I think people appreciate that I've been through it, but a lot of my colleagues would prefer not to share that information. Like they want to keep it professional, and just like you wouldn't ask a therapist whether they have a therapist, right? They kind of feel like their private lives should remain separate.
Mm-hmm.
I'm okay sharing my information.
Yeah, I love that about you. And thanks for being willing to do that today. So, Regina, in your divorce, were you the one who initiated it or was your partner?
I was.
You were?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And I like to share on this podcast that it takes people so much more time than anyone ever thinks to get from the moment where you first start hearing the little birdie in your ear that maybe something isn't right to when you finally decide. So what was that time period for you, and how long was that between when you started feeling something wasn't right and actually ending the relationship?
So for me, what's strange is, we were opposites, and they say opposites attract, but they don't last. And we lasted for 10 years. I mean, I met him when I was 20 and I got pregnant when I was 30. And those were all really happy years. So for me, the end was really swift, but it was it was when I got pregnant, and all of a sudden, like, all our priorities no longer aligned. Like, it became, all of those differences really became quite vivid, and I just couldn't
Yeah.
overcome the differences.
Well, Regina, if you feel comfortable sharing, I'd love for you to talk about how hard that must have been. I had that around a little bit of the same time. I was pregnant. I had very young kids when we got separated. This moment where in the world, is supposed to be this unbelievable experience. You're pregnant, you're having a baby, your life is expanding, and you start realizing, oh shit, like this is not so great with this partner. So what was that like to have, the pressure that this is supposed to be an expansive time, but also feel this, oh no, this isn't working. What was that like?
Well, that's why I say it was heartbreaking, right? I mean, so I wouldn't have gotten pregnant with somebody if I didn't think we were gonna work out.
Right.
And I mean, there's a couple of things I remember. I remember, obviously I'm pregnant, so I'm not able to drink, right? And then I was breastfeeding for like 10 or 11 months afterwards. So it was almost 2 years where I wasn't drinking. And meanwhile, he had a lot of stress going on, and he ramped up his drinking. So
Mhm.
that was problem number one. I'm obviously eating healthy because I'm right. I'm eating for two at this point, and he was going in the opposite direction, kind of eating a lot of junk food and really not taking care of himself. After I had my child, I was hell bent on losing all the baby weight within 3 months, and I did.
Mhm.
And meanwhile, he gained like 30 pounds, right? And
Mhm.
like, and had no plan for losing it. So I mean, that's what I'm saying. Like, all of a sudden, there are all these differences
Mhm.
that I just couldn't ignore, right?
Yeah.
And then our son was born, and I wanted to have him baptized,
Hmm.
and my ex was not religious, and so it wasn't really that important to him, and I had to push it along, and it obviously happened. But this is what I mean, like, a lot of stuff that maybe I just kind of let go during the marriage,
Yeah.
um, right, all of a sudden it came to a head when here we are, we have this little child in the world, and I'm trying to, still keep my job, and also balance, being a new mom.
Mhm.
And he decides to leave his job as an accountant and start his own business in the restaurant industry, which we all know is super risky.
Yeah. Yeah. So it sounds like while you were making these moves in a lot of ways to take care of yourself, which of course also meant taking care of your son, he was doing a lot of moves that were about him.
Right. And it's hard to say, hey, don't go into business for yourself, because
Right.
like he's allowing me to, like, I'm about to experience, right, like, one of the greatest goals I had in life, to be a mom, right?
Yeah.
So how can you say to somebody else, oh, but you can't have your dream,
Yes,
right?
such a good point. Right. And you wanted to be understanding, it sounds like, and allow him to have whatever his dream was. That's such a good point. Do you think, Regina, that part of the problem, I'm just wondering, because I know this was an issue in my relationship, and we had something similarly with religion, like with the Christmas tree. I didn't want a Christmas tree, and he really wanted one. And then one night, I believe when he was drunk, he came home with a Christmas tree without even asked, kind of an aggressive move. And I
Yeah.
always think about that as just a sign of how terrible our communication was. That
Yeah.
even though we had these different experiences, if we could have talked about it, was that something that you struggled with too?
Yeah, I mean, and sadly, I did say I'm really not happy, and I think we should go to counseling. And at that point, he said, I don't want to go see a counselor, but I'm happy to make time, like, once a week, for us to check in with each other. And at that point, like, I'm in crisis mode, and
Right.
and and I'm a divorce professional, realizing that I can't fix this. So
Mhm.
the 1 hour a week was just not going to do it.
Yeah. And did you have any? Because I know I had this as a therapist, like some shame. Like I'm supposed to be the one who kind of has it together and knows about relationships, and here I am with a falling apart relationship at home. Like, did you have any of that of like, I know I should be able to prevent this divorce?
Oh, and I live with the constant shame all the time, because, right, I mean, I'm supposed to be this relationship expert, and you know, uh, it it's been a struggle the last 15 years.
Right. Well,
I've had some pretty rocky relationships since then.
right. But what I love about that is that, if we saw relationships as growing, as we've talked about many times together, as like graduate school for the world, then you're in it. Being in a relationship does not mean you're successful. Trying to figure out how to be in a relationship is the success.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there's a phrase that I use with a lot of my clients that I'll share with you, which is calm waters don't make for skilled sailors.
Yes. Exactly. I couldn't agree more. And exactly like the needing to get in there. That's how you learn, by getting in the roughness, right? Oh, so well said. And so tell me, what kind of healing, so your partner didn't want to go to counseling. Did you, once the relationship was over, what kind of healing did you pursue?
Oh, I definitely checked myself into therapy, and originally it was probably once a week, and then it tapered to every other week. Eventually it was once a month, and I have stayed with the same person the last 15 years.
I love those stories. I have clients like that too. It's such a wonderful relationship to be able to have. And was there anything in particular that therapist kind of helped you see, that superpowered your movement forward into healing?
She's been a great coach and therapist, and just an amazing support person for me the last 15 years. Like, the most interesting thing that she said, and I'll share with you, is when we got past the logistics, because in the beginning it's like the logistics. Okay, like, let's prioritize, where are you going to live, how are you going to co-parent, like all of those immediate things were taken care of. And then she like really slowly planted the seed, like, so what's it going to be like when you date? And I'm like, oh, I don't know. Like, I didn't have a plan for dating. And one of the things she said is, well, dating is a skill, and it's a skill you currently don't have. So she gave me books to read, and I mean, I was like, okay. And then much further along in the process, she also planted the seed that I had not grown up with my father. And that until I went in search of this man and got to understand him and what happened between my parents, I was never going to really be at peace.
Wow. So did you do that?
I did. I'll tell you, I was really not happy to have that homework assignment.
Yeah, I can imagine.
It took a long time to be ready to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. And then you knew the right time, when it was right for you. I mean, did you let yourself lead that versus her? Because I think that's important for people to know, that as therapists, we don't know the right timing.
Right. So it was 5 years after my divorce before I finally was in a place where I thought, you know what? Okay, and she had to coach me, right? Like, what's the worst that can happen? The worst that can happen is that he doesn't want to open up this chapter in his life, and you're not going to have your answers. That's like the worst. But okay, that's no worse than where you are now.
Mm-hmm.
And the best that could happen is that you either connect with him or some other family member, and that's one extra person in your life that you currently don't have.
Wow. And so do you feel comfortable sharing what happened?
Yeah, so that was 10 years ago, and it turns out we do get along quite well. I look almost exactly like him, and we have very similar personalities, and so, like, we're both outgoing and just really easy to get along with other people, right? We both like travel, but the most important thing is it's not just him. Like, I really like my aunt and my uncle, my cousins, and it turns out I have a half brother.
Wow.
Yeah. Who's amazing. I mean, he's amazing.
Wow. So, what's so amazing in this moment is that while you let go of one family unit, you really gained a different family unit.
That's exactly right. It's really ironic, because if I had stayed married, I never would have opened up this door.
Wow.
Yeah.
So the question I was going to ask you is like, what's the thing you couldn't see coming but blew you away? And I feel like this is the thing.
Yeah,
About
that's
your
it.
divorce, right? Like that your divorce would lead to this internal healing that helped you find this part of you. And I'm sure it was not easy, and it wasn't, like in the movies. I mean, it's very complicated, I can imagine. But I think it's really important for people to know that, especially if you're in the thick of it, that doing the personal work on yourself, it's first of all the only thing we can do, because we can't control another person, but it leads to such transformation.
It does.
Right?
Yeah.
Wow. That's an amazing, amazing story. So if you had to kind of go back to when you're just pregnant, just had the baby, and you're at home and you're noticing that he wants to go into the, restaurant business, and you have all the knowledge you have now, and you could go back to that woman and kind of tap her on the shoulder, what would you tell her?
Well, I mean, it's tough because I really think I should have pushed more for the counseling, right? Like
Mm,
instead of being so quick to say, okay, fine, you don't want to do it, then let's just end things,
mhm.
right? And for me, like, I was just a very different person 15 years ago, right? Um, like really maybe overly confident and really no nonsense. So it's like, okay, like if it's not going to be this way, then you're right, like let's just cut ties.
Mhm.
And I guess over the years, one of the things I've learned over 15 years is, you know, people are complicated, situations are complicated, and it's hard to find quality people, like,
Mm,
right? And
yeah.
so when you do find someone that you really can connect with, who's emotionally available, who's responsive to your needs, and is willing to engage on a deep level, I mean, those are three like spectacular things that are really hard to find. And
Mhm.
so maybe it's worth working through some of these other things like the drinking, right? I mean,
Right.
we could have
Right.
come to some compromise on that, or maybe we could have come to some compromise on the number of hours he was putting in at work. I don't know. I mean,
It's so funny. You sound like you're such a true lawyer, right? Because you're talking about compromise, and I'm thinking like he basically said, I'm not willing to do that work. Like
yeah,
that was not, I mean, again, you could have tried harder, you could have pushed harder, but ultimately, when you asked him to show up and do the work, he said no.
right. Right. And the outcome, I think, for both of us has really worked out, right? I mean, I really love that I eventually found this family, and it's
Yeah.
really helped heal a deep wound that I carried for so many years.
Oh, yeah. And what I imagine, how do you think, if you can hypothesize, this might be too therapist-y of a question, so feel free to say you don't answer it, but how do you think finding your dad has shifted your parenting, your ability to parent your boy?
Well, I mean, the biggest lesson is showing him forgiveness, right? I mean, this was a man who chose not to be in my life. This is a
Mhm.
man who, was not around and left my mom to raise me with my grandmother. And
Mm,
we struggled. I mean, we were poor. We didn't live a very lavish lifestyle.
mhm.
Um, but we managed. And so he just wasn't in a good place in his life to be a dad at that moment. But now he's, super happy to be in my life and have a grandson. So so the biggest lesson for Preston is
Yeah.
that, yeah, we all make mistakes, and sometimes they're really big mistakes, but you have to be the bigger person and be willing to forgive. And when you ask him, like, what's the best thing like that
Yeah.
that he's experienced in the last 10 years, he says it's the fact that I found this amazing family.
Mm. That is so powerful. The power of what you're showing Preston with the forgiveness of him is just so profound. And I just want, it. it's just this, I love this idea of you just don't know what's going to happen. I know you all think who are listening that it's going to be terrible and you're not going to be able to continue and your life will be over. But not only is that not true, not only will you pick yourself up and potentially have a better life, but miraculous things will happen.
Yeah. And I think the other takeaway is don't expect the quick fix, right? Because I told you, I waited 5 years before I was in a good enough place to take on this homework assignment. But
Exactly.
that therapist was amazing and instrumental in, changing my life. So as many self-help books as you can read, like there's nothing that's going to compare to that one-on-one relationship that you have with your therapist.
Oh, well, thank you so much. So we're going to have to finish in a moment, but I want to give you an opportunity to share any last thoughts or upon reflection of your beautiful, winding, twisting story of anything you'd want to share with the audience who are going through this process.
I mean, for me, my biggest takeaway is that I never, ever would have wanted to go through a divorce to learn the things that I've learned, but they've made me a tremendous lawyer, right? Because there's so much that it's a humbling experience and it changes you. Like you cannot leave that experience unchanged, but you have to believe that it's for the better, right? The more we learn, the more we can empathize with others. It really is an amazing gift that I was given. You can call it a gift.
Yeah. Well, I think if we embrace change and growth as moving us towards a better understanding of how we want to be in this world, then
Yep.
divorce goes along with it. You are, I am sure, a better lawyer. I'm sure you are because of your experience. I'm sure you are certainly a better daughter to your dad because you went through this experience and could heal yourself, better parent. And so,
And I've learned to pick my battles.
yeah, with everyone, right?
With it, yeah.
Right. Which makes life so much easier, right? Not
Right.
to go after everything and everybody at all times.
Right.
And that comes with time too. I'm so glad what you said. And I really want to say that to people that, we're telling stories in hindsight. So it's easy to make it sound like it happened quickly. But for me too, I'm still working, still transforming every day. So it's a long process.
Yeah, absolutely. But you got to hang in there.
Yes, hang in there. You're worth it, basically. You're deeply worth it. And what's coming is really worth waiting for. So thank you so much, Regina, for sharing and being here today. Can you let people know how best to find you if they want to hear about your work or contact you?
Sure. So my website is reginademeo.com. You can email me at rad@reginademeo.com, and I'm more than happy to reach out.
Great. Thank you so much. And we'll have all that information in the show notes. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being one of the attorneys and lawyers who's willing to share their story. Thanks for the work that you do and your vulnerability. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. And thanks for everything you're doing.
Of course.